At Altadena Heritage, we are a 501c3 dedicated to preservation and advocacy, and we see our job as citizens to advocate for Altadena and to communicate with our county government and to bring people together to discuss important issues, and in this case, infrastructure projects, and to just appreciate our local river system. What we want to do tonight is to look and to learn about how Hahamongna fits in from the San Gabriels to the sea, because understanding that big picture is the basis for this or that project and the LA River. And anyone who likes to, wiggle their toes in the sand, well, the sand at the beach comes from the mountains, so it's definitely all connected. So we can all get on the same page. Los Angeles County Public Works produced a 5-minute video that just is sort of a primer for sediment, the sediment cycle, how it all works.
Los Angeles. For the millions who live, work, and play in the greater Los Angeles basin, there's no other place like it. We love LA for its beautiful beaches, Mediterranean climate, rich culture, and world-class entertainment. It's also one of the few places in the world where you can surf and ski on the same day because local mountains are so close to the coast. The LA Basin is enclosed to the north by the San Gabriel Mountains. The San Gabriels are characterized by steep slopes, which cause the rock and soil to fall off the face of the mountain through a natural process called erosion. Trees, plants, and shrubs play a major part in erosion because their roots hold rock and soil in place. But vegetation is also a fuel source for wildfires. When a wildfire occurs, vegetation is burned away, exposing rocks and soil to the elements and making them even more vulnerable to erosion. Then the rain comes. It doesn't rain often in LA, but when it does, it can be very intense. In fact, some of the highest rainfall amounts in California have occurred in the San Gabriel Mountains. During intense rainstorms, stormwater carries loose soil and rocks downstream. The largest material settles out first in the alluvial fan. Most of the remaining material settles out within the floodplains, while only the smallest sediment is transported to the coast. This process is called the sediment cycle. At the turn of the century, development began expanding to the region's alluvial fans and floodplains. When large, intense storms occurred, stormwater and sediment would cascade down the mountains into developed areas, occasionally causing catastrophic toll on life and property. In 1915, the state legislature formed the Los Angeles County Flood Control District. The district's mission is to manage the risk of flooding and capture and store rainfall to replenish groundwater basins. To reduce the risk of flooding and mudslides, a series of dams and debris basins were built in the foothills. A dam is a barrier built across rivers and streams designed to limit the amount of water moving downstream. Dams reduce the risk of flooding for downstream communities by allowing the district to release water in controlled amounts. Dams also help the district retain rainwater. Holding water behind the dam creates large lakes called reservoirs. When the district releases water from the reservoirs, it moves through a system of open channels into spreading grounds where it is allowed to recharge groundwater basins. Groundwater is a valuable source of local drinking water and meets the water supply demands for a third of the households in Los Angeles County. Debris basins are similar to dams but work on a much smaller scale. Debris basins capture the sediment, rocks, boulders, and vegetation that are washed down the mountains during a major storm, but they still allow water to flow downstream. They are the last line of defense against mudslides and debris flow for communities downstream. Back to our sediment cycle. The San Gabriel Mountains are constantly eroding because of soil type, weather, and wildfires. But this natural system was modified by the flood control system. When it rains, erosion still occurs, but instead of sediment collecting in rivers and spreading out in the alluvial fan and floodplains, it is captured within dams and debris basins. To keep the system functioning properly, sediment must be routinely removed. If sediment isn't cleaned out of the system, more and more sediment builds up behind dams and provides less and less capacity to hold back the stormwater and sediment. Eventually, the dam can fill up, overtop, and flood the downstream communities. Think of it like this. A dam or debris basin functions similar to a bathtub. The bathtub is filled with water and it slowly drains out. But if sand was also added to the bathtub would plug, eventually overflow, and create a really messy bathroom. The Los Angeles County Flood Control District has provided flood risk management for almost 100 years. However, new challenges associated with sediment management have emerged. Attention is being paid to the environmental impacts from sediment management, and opportunities are being explored for the beneficial reuse of sediment. The district is always open to discussing and hearing new ideas, so please share your ideas and find out how to be involved at lasedimentmanagement.com.
Our first speaker is a geologist, Dr. Dave Douglas, and he's the professor and the dean of science and mathematics at PCC. He grew up here. He hiked in these mountains as a kid, and he still does. He knows our mountains. He's a graduate of UCLA and Dartmouth, and was voted the outstanding teacher at PCC. So we're gonna learn from him.
Thank you, tonight. I'm as Michelle said, I'm the geologist, and my role tonight is to paint the big picture. And as geologists, we tend to be big thinkers on terms of time scale. So we think on very long time scales. And we think in terms of systems and interacting systems and how systems interact with each other. And so that's kind of what I'm going to approach here. And I'm just going to flesh out a few of the things that went by lightning fast in that video. And we have a little saying the present is the key to the past. But in this case, we're trying to think about the future. And so the corollary to the present is the key to the past is that whatever did happen can happen. And so that's kind of the thing I like to keep in mind when I think about what's happening along our foothills. So I just want to go over briefly and give you the big picture of these three systems as I sort of think about this interacting. The first is the tectonic system. Why do we have these mountains? A lot of people consider them the third steepest mountains in the continental United States. They're extraordinarily steep. Then we'll talk a little bit about the coastal erosional system or the coastal sediment system that they talked about in the video. And finally, how does all this tie in with the climate system? And, all right, the big scale tectonics thing, and the biggest geological feature in the state is the San Andreas Fault, which runs down here from the Gulf of California to the Salton Trough, does an interesting little bend here in Southern California, and then whistles on straight on up past Cape Mendocino. And this little bend thing is the interesting part because of that bend, the two plates that are sliding past each other actually are squeezing each other a little bit, and that's what's pushing up this little block of mountains called the San Gabriel Mountains and making the San Gabriel Mountains want to crawl over the top of the LA Basin area. But there is a very important fault system that runs along the front of this mountain and runs right along here at the base of the San Gabriels. That's the Sierra Madre fault system. And so it sort of bounds the north end of this little stretch of the Arroyo that we're interested in. But basically this block is trying to climb up over this block. And when you have active mountain uplift, what nature does is try to combat that by eroding those mountains back down again. So you have this balance here. Now, I think of the Arroyo Seco as a tributary to the LA River system. So I tend to think of it as quite a large system. And the history of the LA River is fantastic. You know, Father Juan Crespi in 1769 described the LA River as a 7-yard wide river flowing freely. And they camped there on their first sojourns through Los Angeles. It's the reason the city is where it is, actually. But so we want to think about this as part of this larger system, this larger river system. These river systems drain out of these uplifting mountains. They carry along sediment and so on, and they dump that sediment along the beach. Now, obviously, if you do something like build a concrete arch dam, that interrupts this sediment flow, and it has interesting consequences in different places, particularly down at the beach. And so here we are down in Oceanside, and as a consequence of trapping sediment upstream, we are narrowing the beaches, and here you can see the beach is essentially gone, and we've put some big rocks there to make people feel safe and stuff like that. Well, where was the sand that should have been there? It's up behind some concrete arch dam somewhere. We can divide up the coastline. This is a very useful way to think about it, because if we as human beings alter one part of the system, it's going to have effects in other parts of those systems. So we have topography and we have climate. And as you know from being around here, sometimes our rivers and streams, and this is the Arroyo, a little bit farther down South Pass, sometimes they look like this, little trickles of water, dry. Sometimes they look like this, lots of water and lots of consequence. This guy's over here enjoying the full flowing Arroyo Seco. We live in a Mediterranean climate, which means we get rain in lots of big doses, largely in the wintertime. And we have these flood cycles, we have these drought cycles, and so on. It's the nature of our climate system. So in the thinking of anything that did happen, can happen, this is the News LA Times from 1938. And so we have these cycles of flooding and drought, flooding and drought over the years. And so we have to keep this in mind as we think about how we've altered this sediment system, coastal sediment system. So there's the Devil's Gate. This is an 1888 photo. Again, dry, wet, okay? Lots of high flow, lots of low flow. And I love this picture because you can actually see the devil in Devil's Gate right over there. It's fantastic. This is down near Brookside area. And again, anything that did happen can happen. Obviously, lots of water has come through here. This is in a couple canyons over in Santa Anita Canyon. This was shortly after the 1969 flood, a few days later. And this is kind of normal, average flow of this at the exact same location. Now, the video talked about some of these human interventions that we've put in to try to mitigate some of the issues that come with this. We try to prevent this kind of thing. And so they mentioned debris basins. The guy drew a cute little picture of it. But this is what they look like. They try to catch sediment before it goes on down the wash or before it overtops and has consequences like this. So debris basins often dump water into these large concrete channels. And right here, we're standing at the confluence of the Arroyo Seco and the LA River. It's one of my favorite places to take students. And then we built these concrete arch dams. And of course, this is Devil's Gate. Here it's relatively dry. And here it's relatively wet with water spilling over the spillways. And so all this is part of what happens in our sort of natural climate system here in Southern California, where we go from very wet, extreme wet events to extreme dry events. And this is actually my favorite picture from Hahamongna. That's Jack Parsons from Caltech, sitting there, and they're taking a break from testing rocket engines out in the old Arroyo Seco.
Our next speaker is Josephine Axe, who is in charge of the Army Corps of Engineers study of the Arroyo Seco, which is a very in-depth study. It's been going on for almost 10 years, and they're going to be ready to move into the phase pretty soon where they're implementing, and Hahamongna is part of that study.
We do a lot of studies here in Southern California, and I'm excited to talk to you about the Arroyo Seco study. It has been going on a long time. I need to give a little bit of history, what we're doing and who we're doing it with and how we're getting it done. I think that'll be important for everybody to have that basic understanding. So we have a study, the Arroyo Seco Ecosystem Restoration Integrated Feasibility Study, and our sponsor is Los Angeles County. They've been working with us the whole time, and we initiated this study in 2000 and had the understanding of doing what we are calling a watershed study. When our study completes, we're going to be making specific recommendations along the Arroyo Seco, and I'll get into those in a second. So I won't list all these folks, but boy, there's been a lot of active stakeholder participation, cooperating agencies. If people are familiar with what's being proposed by the Corps and the city and the county for LA River, we're looking at some of those same measures in the Arroyo Seco. So can we remove all the concrete? No, but can we restore more natural conditions? Yes. We really are always keeping in mind some of what Dave's presentation laid out in terms of why is the concrete there to begin with? Well, there were past occurrences of flooding and sediment flows. And so what is called the Los Angeles County drainage area, that's the hundreds of miles of concrete channel that are throughout the county, those were put in place for a really good reason. The Corps and the county worked together to do that. So would we have designed it that way today? No, but it's serving a very important function that we don't want to interfere with as we attempt to restore it to more natural condition. Here we have a close-up to the Arroyo Seco watershed. We're looking at, it says 9 sites there. We divided the length of the Arroyo Seco to the confluence from the forest area there down to the confluence into different reaches. And they were really based on geomorphic considerations, land use considerations, open space, as well as how the channel is structured in those areas. What's important was just to give you all a sense of how we approached looking at how we wanted to restore the area. So we worked within these reaches. And the very top one, of course, is Hahamongna. Decision document is simply what we're going to end up with. So it's important to note that through this planning process, we had a scoping meeting in the fall. We're taking input now from the public. What we want to end up with is this thing called an integrated feasibility report, and it'll have the NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, like environmental compliance piece, and it'll have the CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. So in this one document, it'll have, and hopefully it'll be a year from this summer, so like summer 2016 is what our current schedule is to get the draft report out on the street so people can look at the specifics. And at that point, we would be making a recommendation and we'd have a cost associated with it. So when we're doing a restoration study, we have to use a model to assess the current functions of the habitat, and then we compare it with projected future conditions if our project, whatever it may be, isn't implemented. But future doesn't mean what you have today necessarily. Dave's presentation really was just a great overview. You know, we project what the conditions are going to be in the future and then use these models to assess the habitat conditions at that time. And we've started to put together ideas for how to restore areas in the reaches together. And we have an important milestone meeting coming up in just a few months where we'll get our vertical chain from DC and our regional office in San Francisco, and we'll show them our alternatives to date. And once we get there okay, then we'll move forward. We've checked a couple of those boxes. We're formulating the alternative plans. And then, as I said, in summer of 2016, the goal would be to have a tentatively recommended plan. So we call it tentative because we put it out to the public. We want to get stakeholder, resource agency, public input on that plan. It should say restoration fundamentals. So I want to stress here just a moment that the Corps of Engineers has a restoration mission. So people might think of us more with navigation or flood risk management, but our third primary mission area is what we call ecosystem restoration. And we're really supposed to get involved with projects, with studies that would lead to something where our engineering expertise makes sense, where there's federal interest to restore a habitat. It doesn't have to have been because of a Corps past project, you know, that the Corps built. In this case, there's that connection. But it's looking at places where our engineering know-how can be used to the most effect. And so the rest, because we're a water resources agency, we're supposed to get involved in riparian type restoration. So that's what that sentence is basically getting at, that is the most appropriate for Corps involvement. And we're really supposed to look at structure and function. I always use those two words. So the structure of the Arroyo Seco was greatly altered by the channelization of it. And so how can we put some of that past structure back in while maintaining the flood risk management benefits that are provided, but, you know, restore some of the natural habitat? So the overall problem, I think we are all very well aware, almost complete loss of stream conditions, structure, and function. So then you don't have those aquatic species, you don't have the wildlife, and then our models that we use try to get at also ecological processes, you know, cycles. The sediment cycle, we can assess that. We can assess nutrient cycling. We can assess, you know, percolation of water into the groundwater, and all of that with an eye toward habitat functionality. You know, that's a key aspect of this. So our overall goal, no surprise, is to restore habitat, improve aquatic habitat there. The natural stream Sinuosity has, definitely been lost. So where appropriate, if we can incorporate some of that sinuosity back, getting that structure back, that's something we're looking at. And then a secondary objective, but a really important one, is the recreation. So we always say we will formulate for restoration options, and then when we have a recommended plan, we'll say, where can we incorporate recreation in a way that doesn't interfere with the proposed restoration? You don't want to impede or impair the integrity of what you've just spent this time and effort restoring, but you want the public to be able to enjoy it and appreciate it. So it's definitely a balance there. So there is our planning objective. We're looking at quality and quantity of aquatic, wetland, and riparian habitats. Riparian meaning just along a stream. When we look at our future without project conditions, we're assuming that Devil's Gate Dam is there and that the county is proceeding with their sediment removal that they need to do in order to keep the reservoir operating like it needs to. So in fact, the more we looked at it, the more there's not a lot of opportunity for the Corps' restoration study to do a lot in the Hahamongna area because of the need to remove the sediment there. And I know that the county has applied. I'm planning, I'm not regulatory division, but we have a whole division that the county is working with. They would need a permit from us under the Clean Water Act. So, they've applied for a permit just recently in the fall, and they're working with us on what the jurisdictional wetlands are and what they need to do, if any, for mitigation. And so for our planning purposes, we are not interested in proposing restoration in the Hahamongna area that would then be disrupted or damaged because the county needs to come in and do what they need to do to maintain the functioning of that reservoir. So at the very least, we'll be able to coordinate with them, and if they need to do any mitigation, we can make sure it's in line with what we're proposing to restore, and so it works well together. But that's an important constraint. Hazardous, we call it HTR, actually usually there's a W, hazardous toxic radioactive waste at the Jet Propulsion Lab. The Corps is not charged with remediation or cleanup, so that's something that we can't get involved with, so that's a constraint. We definitely want to minimize impacts to transportation infrastructure, minimize impacts to nearby residences, especially such a historically significant, culturally significant area. We have a cultural resources specialist on the team who's working to do everything that we need to do to meet the laws and rules and requirements to do with cultural resources, but that's definitely a important, significant consideration in this area. So what are we looking at possibly doing? So again, I've mentioned restore habitat more than once. So as I say with LA River, we can't come in and take out all the concrete. We can try to be creative with it. We can remove it where possible. There's opportunities for restoring freshwater marsh, for getting a natural stream bed. I think that's so important, both for infiltration purposes and for, in terms of fish and other aquatic species, to have a natural stream bottom. But of course, you've got to be cognizant of the flood risk related to that. And then riparian buffers. So when we've gone out and we've done it multiple times, done site visits, brought resource agency folks out in the field, we're looking, it's trade-offs. Can you move this low flow channel in a way and restore natural sinuosity? Can you but you have to keep in mind the high flows that are going to happen, as Dave was telling us. We know at some point it's going to flood again. So we're always looking at how we can maximize that restoration while at the same time making sure we can handle the larger flows when they come. So it really is a balancing act. And, there's ideas, can you put a high flow channel underneath the existing channel? So you get a big storm and you can just have a culvert where the high flows go and have a nice low flow natural channel on the surface. So those are some of the things we're looking at. And I did mention the model. So the one that we're proposing to use is called Combined Habitat Assessment Protocol. Basically, again, it's a way to compare. Like we have to make our case in DC for why the Arroyo Seco should get funding for restoration as opposed to coastal Louisiana or the Everglades or the Great Lakes. Like we have to show the benefits and quantify the benefits. And so that's why we have to use this model. We can't just say, oh, X many miles of riparian habitat. We've got to get at the functions that will be restored, and that helps us make our case in terms of national significance. So I put up the lead planner's name, Priyanka, and then the lead planner, so to speak, from the county of Public Works as well. And now I'm turning it over to Tim.
Our third speaker is our dear friend Tim Brick, who is the executive director of the Arroyo Seco Foundation. He's the former chairman of Metropolitan Water District. He represented Pasadena on that board for 30 years, and he's been a speaker at our programs before, so we're really happy to welcome him back.
Wanted to give kind of the big picture of what's going on from Hahamongna and what Hahamongna means to all of us who have the pleasure of living up here with the mountains always in front of us, always giving us grand visions of who we are and what we represent. And certainly Hahamongna represents that as well. So Hahamongna, why is Hahamongna so special? I mean, that's really the question that we're here to talk about. Hahamongna, that special link. What is it about Hahamongna that's so special? It's because it's really the vital link between the San Gabriel Mountains and downtown Los Angeles. This is the River Center where we have our office. And you can see also, it's important to know that the San Rafael Hills and the Verdugo Mountains and all of this connects as one grand ecosystem connection from the San Gabriel Mountains over to the Santa Monica Mountains and gives tremendous ecological value to this area. What is it really that makes it so special? Well, it's the wildlife. I mean, this is the best place definitely to see wildlife in this area by far. And I hope a lot of you have seen some of the wildlife. I'm not sure you particularly want to see this fellow here too often. This picture was actually taken right there at the JPL Bridge a few years ago. He doesn't come around too often, but he is around. This has always been a tremendous spot, and a lot of the earliest bird studies of Southern California got done right here at Hahamongna. And here we see the classic red-tailed hawk. And a lot of that richness comes not just from its location, but because it brings together, because of the environmental conditions there, at least 5, actually more than 5 different kinds of unique habitat zones through the area. So it's very rich because of the diversity of the habitat zones that are found there. Pond marsh, oak woodland, riparian, chaparral, alluvial scrub. It's the water and its significance to the water resources, which is extremely important. That water provides about 40% of the water to this region. And here you can see a slide of the percolation ponds. That's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, so we're looking south here from the hills above Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And the Arroyo Seco Foundation is involved in a project with Pasadena Water and Power Department in which we're actually going to improve the environmental conditions there, and we're going to extend actually the spreading basin some and improve the conditions so that some old flood structures are going to be taken out of the canyon just up from the JPL Bridge and a little bit into the mountains, and we're going to put some new screens on Pasadena's diversion and really allow Pasadena to kind of stabilize its water supply. I wanted to give you a sense of what that used to look like, that same area used to look like, and that's of course the 40s. And you can see what the natural stream looked like coming through that area. And these were the shacks that they were putting up during the Second World War. The blue area is the Raymond Basin. Hahamongna is up in the Monk Hill part of the Raymond Basin. And it's a 40 square mile groundwater basin that provides a lot of the water to this region too. It's one of the major groundwater basins of Southern California, although it's much smaller than the main San Gabriel Basin. But it shares the same kind of contamination. For those of you who don't understand groundwater basins, you know, there's an aquifer below us. It's kind of like a bowl of sand and gravel. It's really alluvium that's washed down from the mountains and that the water has collected in that alluvium. And then generally, groundwater basins are ringed by earthquake faults that go around. And so the one that's under us is called the Raymond Basin. And the two main entry spots into the Raymond Basin Actually, water percolates all through the foothills, really, into the Raymond Basin. But the two best spots really are at Devil's Gate, Hahamongna, and at Eaton Canyon. Devil's Gate, water supply of Pasadena. It was the first water supply developed by Benjamin Eaton in 1875 or something like that, very, very soon thereafter. And there's just a lot of elements of the history that really have made this such a spectacular place. And it's really important for us to know about the history of this area because we have lost so much. And hopefully this history will motivate us to really do something to try to restore a lot of those values as much as we can in the kind of society that we live in. So the Arroyo, it's very important for you to know, was once a steelhead stream. There's only a couple of streams on the LA River system that had steelhead on them. These were 20-pound fish. The reason we don't have a river system is because we built a flood system that didn't accommodate biological values and the fish. And there were three elements to it. The first was the establishment of Devil's Gate Dam in 1920. The second came 22 years later when the U.S. Forest Service built Brown Canyon Barrier Dam, which is 3.5 miles up the Arroyo Seco. This was Los Angeles County first flood control dam built in 1920. The first major project of the Los Angeles County Flood Control District. It was built for the dual purpose of flood protection and water conservation. You know, it would be foolish for anyone to deny the terrible floods that have occurred in the Arroyo Seco. We'll have a little bit more on that in a minute. But these are some slides. This is down near the confluence, this house sliding into it. And then most of the damage occurred in the Los Angeles part of the Arroyo during that flood. And a lot of people were killed in that flood, as a matter of fact. I think it was like 40. So floods are not new in the Arroyo Seco, but the sediment buildup is. All right, so they started in 34. There was a big flood in La Crescenta, terrible flood. Oh my gosh, people got washed out at the Veterans Hall. So they came in and they started channelizing areas, and they did the initial channelization of the Arroyo Seco in 1934. And then they came through and got more serious after the flood, the big flood in 1938, which was the biggest flood in the last 100 years. So they really turned the river into this. Pretty grim pictures. Is this any way to treat a river? And it was part of a massive program that was really designed to be, they called it the Los Angeles River Watershed Management Program. And it was tied into all of the sediment basins and the development of the debris basins and all of that came after that. It filled up pretty quickly with sediment. And a lot of it is explained by the Flood Act of 1934, which enabled the Corps of Engineers to get involved in local flood management programs. And so on that basis, the Corps of Engineers came into Los Angeles and really made Los Angeles a real center for experimental approaches to flood control. And these projects have never been reviewed in that context. So as Josephine said, they could never build them today because they don't integrate the multiple values that projects should be integrating. Now, let me quote from a story that appeared in the LA Times on July 11th, 1937, so early in this whole process. This was the regional ranger from the U.S. Forest Service. That's big. That's the guy over all of California. And he said, what we are seeking now is coordination of various government agencies, he said, to put into effect for the first time in the United States upstream flood control projects. The first experiments in conservation history in this country had been carried on in the upper reaches of the Arroyo Seco Canyon. And I don't deny the good things. You seem like begrudging. I know it's really been significant. I agree. But nobody ever talks about what we lost. We lost fish and wildlife. We lost steelhead in that stream. We lost the trout in that stream. We lost the aquatic life, the newts and other kinds of animals. There's a lot fewer birds and other kinds of wildlife than there would be there otherwise. We've lost precious water systems because the flood system is essentially a system to waste water. Think about that. And to degrade ocean water quality as well. It has those dual effects, which are rarely talked about. So, are these facilities, as we look to the future, that's the past, as we look to the future, are these facilities sustainable? And I think we even have to ask the question, have human efforts aggravated the flood threat? by building in the floodplain, by not maintaining flood facilities in an ongoing way. A new way of planning and resiliency is needed, and everybody in the water industry knows this. We all say, we're for integrated regional water management, where we take the multiple purposes that we try to accomplish with water projects and environmental projects, because water projects are always environmental projects. We take those and we integrate them together so that we don't do one at the expense of the other. Everybody's into that rhetoric, but very few people are into that reality. And those purposes include certainly flood protection as one of the most important, stormwater capture, conservation, habitat and wildlife, stream and ocean water quality, recreational opportunities and trails and connectivity. So, depending upon how that policy is actually implemented, it could be a good sign for dealing with flood challenges in a more natural way in the future. And that concludes my brief comments. Thank you very much.
Well, I imagine that there's some questions. I mean, I think we're having this really important big conversation and we're listening to each other. And we also, I think we have some questions that we can direct at any of our three speakers. We have Chris Stone from the county here.
John Howell, Arroyos and Foothills Conservancy. I'm just curious if wildlife passage, wildlife corridors, and improving and enhancing wildlife passage is one of your goals.
All right, so the idea of connectivity both from the river channel to the floodplain areas and through the area are both important. So those will both be functions that we look at. When we evaluate habitat and functionality, it's important to take into account how species move and whether they can operate and thrive, be successful in the area. So the short answer is yes. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, my name's Dave Gaines. I'm a Pasadena resident. I wanted to ask you what the hazardous and toxic waste site is at JPL, and will that impact the drinking water we get out of?
We've known for 30 years or so that there was serious contamination from volatile organic chemicals and also from perchlorate later that have closed a lot of wells in this area. JPL and NASA, which is, JPL is a NASA facility, have been doing a cleanup program on their campus for over 10 years. And they've also been doing some treatment programs on local wells in order to, they've now recently produced a plan where they're going to accelerate the cleanup. It's their final plan, and the document is out for review. So if you want to give me your email or whatever, I'll try to make sure that you can, I believe that there's a couple of more weeks for review of their final plan. But they're trying to accelerate the cleanup. The contamination is actually pretty deep and has been very carefully studied at great expense by the people from NASA and JPL. And if you really want the complete story, it'd be good to look at the document they've put out recently, which has their plan for, first of all, their analysis of how serious the situation is, and secondly, their plan for how they're going to clean it up and do it on a more expedited basis.
Yeah, Lori Paul from Altadena. It seems that downstream there's relatively few red areas on the maps that are really in danger from serious flooding, and with the literally billions that are at risk, rather than trying to fix the structures, I think all this entire problem's been about bad land use planning to begin with. And of course, if you have a home there, you're concerned, but you can buy a lot of homes with the billions of dollars. Can we restore the streams and look at actually purchasing and restoring the natural system? And in other words, a cost-benefit analysis.
I can speak specifically for the LA River restoration study. We did look at early on, all right, if we wanted to remove all of the concrete, what would it take? And so the channel is on average 300 feet long, and we have this figure that shows you'd have to have about 5 times the current channel in order to maintain the existing flood protection and remove all the concrete. And the real estate costs alone was over $7 billion, and this was for an 11-mile stretch of the LA River. So I am not aware that we did that detailed of an analysis with the Arroyo Seco, but it's the same idea when we're looking at the historic nature of the area, existing residences, businesses. I think it would be a stretch in terms of implementability and practicability to propose, buying out large swaths of land where people currently live in businesses. But obviously, with Hurricane Sandy, superstorm, I can't say superstorm, the storm Sandy that came in and hit New York, there are places there that people might be aware of, might know more than I, that are looking at that concept of managed retreat. When we deal with the Coastal Commission in terms of shoreline projects, I mean, that's something we have to look at as an action alternative. What if you were to not do X, Y, Z and let, nature follow its course? So I tried to answer specifically with the project I know well, the LA River, a little bit about Arroyo Seco, but then just generally the philosophical question, is our society willing to buy people out, and would people be willing to support that and move? I feel like it's an ongoing question that's getting more and more traction in the United States.
Hi, Anthony Portantino, and I have a question on the sediment removal piece. And early on, you said that the Army Corps of Engineers issues the permit for that.
Yeah.
So are you my question is, who's the lead agency with the final decision? And if somebody could walk us through the process of what's going to happen and who makes which decision in the process, so people know, frankly, where we have to fight.
I don't know if there's a final arbiter per se, but under the Clean Water Act, the Corps has the regulatory responsibility. We are evaluating with the county the jurisdictional limits of the wetlands there. So the county wouldn't be able to proceed until they get this water quality 404 permit, it's called. It's still early on in the process. I think literally I was told we're going out in the field tomorrow with some county folks, and again, I'm in planning, so I don't want to presume to speak for regulatory division. So just speaking generally, the Corps would be involved in that process with the county, and it could lead to an environmental assessment, a NEPA document that people would be able to comment on. But when you say final arbiter, I'll just say that the Corps, they would need one permit from the Corps regulatory division. I'm sure they need other permits from state agencies as well, yeah. I was going to comment that something we've really struggled with and worked with USGS and others on is, what is the future water budget going to be? So we're planning these restoration measures in the river, and we have to assume a certain water flow. So we know there's seasonal variation, and we know there'll be annual variation, but what amount makes sense? Like, what habitat should be restored? We don't want to put in a restoration project and then have to irrigate it. I mean, the idea is to have it naturally, you create the structure, and then you kickstart it with some native plants, but then it should thrive on its own. But if we're entering into a period of prolonged drought, and I think I've probably heard the similar news that you have, it's not as if the rain conditions will be what we haven't seen in the historical past. It's that we haven't seen the current drought-like conditions with temperatures that are as high as they are. So it's really that combination of, well, we've had a drought like this before, but never with such high temperatures. And that's going to change how the landscape operates in a lot of different ways. Getting to your infiltration question, I don't know if I'm the best person. Are you going to take a stab at that, Dave? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I don't think we currently have the idea that the kind of rainfall we're going to see, the intensity of rainfall over a very short period of time, I don't know if we've yet figured out how to capture that in a real-time way. But we do know from looking at tree rings, all kinds of data, that things have been drier in the past, they've been wetter in the past. And thinking about where we would be in 50 years is, if we'd have done that 100 years ago, we probably wouldn't be having this debate right now. But thinking about what it's going to be like and using our best information available today to try to meet the puck where it's going to be instead of try to skate to where the puck is now, I think is a very good, sensible approach to do that. But I don't know that we have the ability to capture such huge amounts of water in a very short period of time and store it. I don't think we're there yet.
There is a fair amount of percolation that goes on in Southern California, and there's much more of a focus within the water industry, I would say particularly in the last 5 years, on how to capture more stormwater, because it's actually a pretty large source of water. Stormwater is, they say that, 650,000 acre feet a year are going out the Los Angeles River. There's probably more water going out the Los Angeles River than ever before, largely because of recycled sanitation water, candidly. But there is a real focus by water agencies and water planners on how to do much better percolation of stormwater and stream water into groundwater basins. The project that the Arroyo Seco Foundation is doing with the city of Pasadena is trying to attempt to really put Pasadena in a position where it could take the water that it has water rights to. See, there's also issues of water rights that are associated with this. And so Pasadena has water rights to 25 cubic feet per second coming out of the stream, but the stream is rarely anywhere near that. It's much, much lower than that. So the system that we're trying to implement, it would allow Pasadena to take a bit more water during high flow events. So the increment of water that would go would be during high flow events, and to use the local resources that way better. But there's a lot of focus among water planners on the kind of things that you're talking about. You're on a very important part of the solution for dealing with climate change.
One of the main guys behind this program tonight is Dr. Norman Brooks, who lives in Altadena, and he's a hydrologist emeritus. And when we've been talking about the Hahamongna project in general, he has made the point, he said, you can predict where the water is going to go if we have a storm. He says, and there's all sorts of places that it could run into, which I think is sort of like the idea behind the river parks. He said that it would be a lot cheaper to mitigate for where you know it's going to jump the channel and not do as huge a project to destroy as much habitat within Hahamongna, where so many of us recreate and, we have, bird watching and everything else. And so I'm wondering if that approach is not possible today to take more of that approach. And I don't know who'd like to answer that first.
Yeah, looking at what you could do downstream, I mean, what we're planning for when you're operating a dam is looking at those major storm events and how they're going to impact communities downstream. When you're talking about the huge storms in 1938, the 1969 storms, those kind of storms, no matter what kind of river park you have downstream, you're not going to be able to deal with that kind of water coming down the Arroyo Seco. You got to have something else there to provide that protection, or you have to have a large enough riverine system to be able to carry that safely through the communities. So I think just the sheer magnitude of that is probably not likely to be able to be accomplished unless you do some major modifications like that. One thing I just wanted to mention about the sediment removal project at Devil's Gate, and and I know there's controversy on both sides of that, but I just wanted to state that what our agency is responsible for is managing risk for those communities that are downstream, and that is very critical to us. And with that, I think that all of that goes back to the point on how much sediment do you need to take out of the reservoir. And with our judgments and our engineering, we believe that the amount that we've identified will ensure that all those communities are well protected downstream, and that no one's going to be at risk, because The consequences of us being wrong are tremendous. You're talking about people losing their homes. You're talking about the 110 freeway being flooded and impassable. You're talking about probably lots of people that would die in that situation. So are we conservative? Maybe so. But again, it's our agency that's responsible for managing that risk. It's nobody else. So.
I just asked if anyone else would like to take a stab at answering whether it would be possible to plan for flood safety and in a way that would not involve taking as much sediment out, because I've seen other, like the Pasadena plan, where I think they said 1.1 million. I just wondered if anyone, any of our experts here would like to give their opinion on that. You've got one right there.
I don't really want to engage in an argument as to what amount is appropriate. And this perhaps gets back to your question, Anthony, of where decisions are going to be made. I would like to introduce our attorney, Mitchell Sy, who is here today.
My name is Mark Goldschmidt. I'm with the Altadena Heritage. And I think the thing that has been kind of glossed over here, I agree with we need to remove a lot of sediment. We all know that. But there's the recreational component to Hahamongna is very important for this very crowded city. And it seems to me that there's also a wildlife component to that. The restoration of Hahamongna, once the sediment is removed, is it going to be restored, first of all, for wildlife and for recreation? And second of all, I was wondering why the whole, 80-something acres is going to be completely fenced off during the whole operation, whereas you could easily phase that. Fences, in looking at the total cost, a few chain link fences is not going to be a significant amount of money, so that people can continue to ride their horses and their bicycles and go bird watching on the part that is not at that time being actually excavated and stripped bare. And I'd like to have I'd like to know what the Corps of Engineers plans to do with that land in terms of restoring it for our use and for wildlife. And so, Josephine, can you answer that?
Sure, I'll just briefly say that that's part of the regulatory process I was mentioning. So the county has applied, and we'll work with them. If mitigation is necessary, then we'll develop a mitigation plan.
Mitigation is obviously necessary, Josephine.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you so it is
Well,
will be
since
necessary.
I'm not in regulatory, I'm just trying.
Okay,
not to
maybe I can
say
ask
that-
Chris Stone to answer that. I mean, why are we blocking that off from access for 5-10 years?
Our intention is not to block off any of the trails and whatnot. We intend to keep those open all during the sediment removal project. I had not heard this idea of fencing off the area, so I will check into that, but I am totally unaware of that. Just so you know the process a little bit, when you you can't apply for permits and start talking about mitigation until you have your environmental document approved. So once that was approved, it would allow us to submit our project for permits. We have to get permits from the Corps of Engineers, from California Fish and Wildlife, from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and all those agencies are going to have a say in how we mitigate the impacts of that project. So we're just starting down that road. We're putting together our proposed mitigation for that project, and then we will be sharing that with the regulatory agencies to see if they agree with what we are saying would mitigate for all those impacts. But there will be mitigation, absolutely, and there will be a lot of it.
That seems really a backwards way to look at it to me. It seems like the mitigation you should think about the mitigation before you start the project.
Before you destroy everything.
Well, the idea is until you have an approved project, you can't submit for a regulatory permit. So that's the way the law is.
Well, we've reached 9 o'clock, and I want to thank all of our speakers and all of you for this really thoughtful discussion. And I think we all need to get into the room together and listen to each other more often. And I hope that you'll check out AltadenaHeritage.com and see our upcoming programs. We have many programs, of this nature. And thank you all very much for coming.
lot of people have heard about the LA River Revitalization Program and the Army Corps' plan to bring in $1 billion of projects to revitalize the Los Angeles River. What people don't know is that that plan includes the confluence of the Arroyo Seco with the Los Angeles River. But even better than that, the Army Corps has been doing a study here in the Arroyo for more than 10 years about how to restore the ecosystem. So how to restore habitat and wildlife and water resources and all the good stuff here in the Arroyo. So how to do real stream restoration in the Arroyo Seco. So this is a tremendous program. It's going to be, they're going to complete their plan within the next year or so, and it's going to lay out alternatives for restoring the stream here in the Arroyo Seco.
You know, I remember like when I was a kid, this was this low flow stream area that was, you know, it's water diverted from the Arroyo, was a place that my mom used to take me and my brother, and we used to go tromping all through here, and there were tadpoles, they were in the water, and planted seeds, I guess, one of those things that, you know, you got older, you start to appreciate it more. It was a great experience. The Arroyo River Parks not only is about returning the river system to the parks, you know, making them all kind of work together harmoniously, making the parks a part of that river system, but it's about connecting the entire watershed too, connecting the entire Arroyo, so that I do have the freedom, the connectivity to use all of these parks that are along the Arroyo, all the way from Los Angeles, all the way up to Altadena and La Cañada, that we can have a trail system, a bike system, to travel the length of the Arroyo, so that, you know, people who want to ride their horses on these trails, they can ride down to the LA River, which is going to be beautifully restored, and they can ride back up the Arroyo.
The Arroyo, every 20 years or so, has a flood, and there was a very bad flood in 1914, and after that flood, the Arroyo kind of became a testing ground for flood techniques, for new techniques. And so, for instance, they built Devil's Gate Dam after that, and then they came back in the 30s and 40s and they built the flood channel in this area. And their intention was to get rid of the floodwater as fast as possible. Well, what they didn't anticipate was what impact that was going to have on fish and aquatic life and wildlife through the area, and just the stream itself and people's ability to really enjoy the streams. They really destroyed the stream in order to put in a concrete channel to accelerate the flow of water. We hope that we could take out the flood channel and really restore a natural stream all through this area here, because there are really no structures in this area that would be damaged by a flood anyway. I think we can look at this concrete channel that's here and a lot of the concrete that is along the Arroyo as an experiment that had, you know, I guess it had some use. You know, there haven't been any flood damage situations here in the Arroyo in the last 100 years. But on the other hand, it's destroyed a tremendous environmental resource here, and that is the Arroyo Seco stream.
What's crazy about this spot is that this actually used to be the canyon's edge, the western edge of the Arroyo. And they blasted through the hillside right here to build the channel. So they carved the channel, blasted through it. Now it's sort of like this island. It's sort of like this little mountainous island in the middle of the Arroyo. But the river actually used to go around that way. So I've spent a lot of time doing cleanups down in the confluence twice a year. There's La Gran Limpieza, there's the Heal the Bay events, the Coastal Cleanup Day, and so I've been down there for years cleaning up the confluence. And just to think that maybe 10 years from now, maybe less, that the confluence is going to look more like this than it does now, which is pretty much a big concrete, you know, sewer channel. It's going to happen, you know, it's going to happen. So it's exciting.